Hi, my name's Matt Locke, and this is the Everyday Athlete Podcast, the podcast for the everyday athletes around the world who refuse to be average and who want to create a legacy of health, fitness, and achievement in every aspect of their life. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it's time to forge your future.
We should move rapidly on to the subject that Courtney's been itching to get to. And as I think Ed said at the beginning, Courtney is on a mission to make all women pee-free. And even that term pee-free or urinary leakage and peeing a little. And it was really funny. I know Ed already said it when I skirted around, and what he didn't mention earlier was because I'm a British gentleman and I was trying to be gentle on the subject, which is ridiculous. And as you quite rightly corrected me and said, well, look, the medical term's incontinence, so let's use that, shall we? Because it's the correct term. What we're talking about is incontinence. But I was introduced to that last year. At an event we did in Canberra, Hey Scotty, SFS. Great event, and long story short, we were about to go and do the next workout, and two of my female friends said, oh, we've got to go and change. We've got to put our black shorts on. I went, oh, really? That's a little bit vain, isn't it? Like costume change based on an event? And they looked at me and just started laughing, and they said, you have no idea, do you? I was like, nope. What are we talking about? And so they educated me about the fact the next workout had double unders in it, and both of them, who are mothers as well, and I know Courtney, bear with me, but they said, yeah, well, we're going to pee ourselves a little bit for sure. We always do. It's double unders. That's just what happens. And I don't know that they use the word it's normal, but for them, it's accepted. It's normal. It's just what it is. That's what happens. So we wanted to help, I guess, get the message across that you're wonderfully passionate about, that as Ed said earlier, and he was quoting you, that even though it's really common, it's not normal. And actually, there's a whole bunch of stuff that can be done to either help it improve it or get rid of it entirely. But I'm hoping you've got your balloon there with you, Courtney, because, did you not bring the balloon?
I do. I have the
balloon. Because if you could talk to us a little bit about the whole subject of incontinence as it pertains to women in sports. And just when someone says, oh, I've got a really weak bladder, what would your answer to that be?
Well, I get a bit excited about this topic, so feel free to just cut me if I ramble. Where do I even start? But if you have a weak bladder, sometimes it's actually like women get really confused with the whole weak bladder thing, because there is actually like sensitivity of the bladder, which becomes hyperactive maybe, and you are constantly going to the bathroom. However, most of the time in terms of incontinence, or most of the things that I see that's more common, especially in the athlete world, is like a pressure-based incontinence that's associated with pelvic floor issues. So it could be weakness or tightness, something's not working correctly in that core-based unit. That's actually creating this incontinence rather than a weak bladder. So obviously this is generalized. Lots of this is very individualized to people, so your symptoms could be different. So I just want to make that pretty clear that this is just sort of generalizations I'm talking about. But it is pretty much that system, core canister system, which let me just grab my balloon right now.
Yeah, go grab your balloon. We did an outtake after Courtney and I chatted the first time, and she went, we've got to start recording again. You haven't seen my balloon.
Oh, this is totally not my original idea, by the way. So
own it. Don't worry about it.
But and it's deflated a little bit since last time. But the whole core canister is basically like a pressure regulating system. So you don't actually have like empty space in your abdominal cavity, but this is just a visualization to see how everything kind of works. But it's basically pressure building up inside your abdominal cavity, and when it's going to go where it's going to go is where is weaker. So this here is your diaphragm at the top, which is obviously attached to your lungs, your abdominals, or what we call transverse abdominis, which is your deepest layer of your core, wraps around your spine like a bit of a corset, and then you have your pelvic floor at the bottom. So if you're excessively lifting, for example, and you've braced your abdominals and you've taken a really big inhalation breath, everything here is all pressurized. I'm really bad at doing this, by the way, sorry. But everything here is going to bulge downwards. And if your pelvic floor like muscle is not actually strong enough to withstand the pressure that's bearing downwards, then you're going to get leakage, basically. Pelvic floor's job is to hold urine in. So if it's not working well, it's going to come out, basically.
Sure thing. I know this one's going to rile you, but we had Philippa sent us a note saying that in her opinion, and she claims to be a medical doctor, in her opinion, it's okay to pee during double unders, for example. And for those watching who are not familiar, that's it's a jump rope, and the rope passes under your feet twice for every jump. So you're landing quite heavily. So it's a gymnastic move, but reasonably high impact, and that is ultimately what lots of women experience incontinence through. But she said it's okay to pee during double unders, that it's a correlative intensity. So it just means that you're working really hard. I'm going to stand back now and let you take that one on, Courtenay. I mean, what you've just described to me didn't necessarily sound like what Philippa has said. I'm guessing you don't agree.
Well, not entirely. Well, I guess it is correlated with intensity, because the higher the intensity is and the lower, like the least strength your pelvic floor is, then it's going to come out. So it is, if you're going up in intensity and this is building and building and building pressure and your pelvic floor can't withstand it, then it's true. It is going to be correlated with intensity, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's okay to keep doing that, because it means this is too weak to withstand the amount of recruitment or pressure that's building in here. So I always talk to my ladies about working towards your weakest link, basically. Or I kind of try and describe it a bit like a knee injury, because it's a muscle. Your pelvic floor is a muscle. It's just inside you. And when it's injured, for example, or not working properly, it's going to cause leakage rather than pain. Whereas if you have knee pain, you would stop because it's too hard. Or you would say, oh, I've got this knee issue now. I can't squat the normal amount of weight that I can. So I'm going to just practice technique and back off the weight. Like, that's exactly what you should be doing with your pelvic floor and your core work, or core recruitment. Saying that you're not, like, you're working harder, which is a good thing, and it's okay to pee at that level, is just like, I definitely don't agree with that. But I feel like I should just leave that there. I don't think that's okay.
I'll come and save you, Courtney, before you say something you
I know, I'm scared.
Will, I might bring you in on this, because we were talking off air before, and we've seen, I guess, the development of a lot of, how would you put it, perhaps the education of the functional fitness space and how that's improved over the last decade. This attitude that, peeing yourself during double unders or box jumps or cleans is okay. I guess we've probably seen functional fitness competitions where people have in fact done that, and it sort of gets brushed off by athletes sometimes. It's just, oh yeah, that's just what happens to me, and as long as I'm finishing first, then it's not a big deal. I don't see it as a problem. How do we sort of turn the tide on that it's like, hey, it doesn't really matter if you're finishing first. This is not something that's okay. Just like kind of doesn't matter if you're finishing first if you've got a rounded back. Like that's a problem that we wouldn't want people to try and replicate.
Right. It's one of those things where I think the coach has to be, again, they have to give a shit enough to learn about it and say something, and not be like, oh yeah, like go get a mop and clean that up, clean up on aisle 4. Instead of like making banter and joking about it, they should be like, listen, I see that you have leakage. That means your pelvic floor is weak, and that's a muscle that you need to have in order to lift safely. If you fix your pelvic floor, your lifts will be able to go up, because when you have that intra-abdominal, intrathoracic cavity that you're bracing when you're doing things like squats, deadlifts, whatever it is, if you can't pressurize that cavity enough, you're not going to be able, one, to keep your internal organs as pressurized or as safe as possible. And 2, you're not going to be able to utilize that pressurization to help you lift more. So when it comes to performance athletes, it's imperative. You don't see a lot of elite level Olympic lifters, when a girl catches a snatch, you don't see them start peeing everywhere. You don't see that. If they want to go to the Olympics, they have to take that stuff seriously. And it's the same stuff that you talk about as far as like in functional fitness competitions. If someone like does a gross amount of butterfly pull-ups or muscle ups and they tear their hands, like, oh, look, cool, blood. And it's like, now you can't train. Like, now you can't train anymore, or you have to train around that. Or, there's so many things that goes into, but at least with that, they can't continue because their body's telling them like, I can't grab the bar, don't do that. Same thing, with the pelvic floor. They don't have the ability to do that because it doesn't hurt. And I think that's a pretty big issue, and that I've seen. And I think it's just bringing awareness to it, like, hey, this isn't funny. Like, you should probably get that looked at, and here's a recommendation to go or some pelvic floor exercises at a very brief level. I know there's different phases or different stages of urinary incontinence and pelvic floor dysfunction. And I think it's not as simple as, go do some Kegels or go do some movements that are going to help the pelvic floor. I think it's understanding like, hey, this is what you can do for now, but I recommend going to see like an exercise physiologist to actually help solve that problem internally.
Yep.
Can I also just quickly jump in here and say that for women that are listening to this going, it's only pee, like why the big deal? Most women don't actually realize that that's the first sign of a possible or prolapse, which for anyone that doesn't actually know is where your pelvic organs will descend downwards and often come out on the outside. So that is very serious and very uncomfortable and is very much a big impact on your life if that happens, and is much harder to treat. Sometimes it doesn't, depending on what stage it is you can't really do that much about it, or it requires surgery. So just because you're only weeing now doesn't mean that you're not then at risk of something worse happening. It's kind of like, oh, I've got a really sore shoulder, I'm just going to keep doing this overhead press, and then all of a sudden you've torn your rotator cuff and you go, I wish I just sort of stopped. That's what we're doing. Like, we're at the pain, we're stopping before the actual further injury, or doing something about it. So it is actually going to further on down the track. Most of the ladies that end up with prolapse don't know this until they've got prolapse and say, I wish someone had told me that that was something I should have watched out for.
Sure.
I think it's a big point you brought up about the internal organs is the reason that you, like I said, when you pressurize your abdominal cavity, when you squat, it's literally there to protect your organs. And if you're peeing and there's a leakage, you're now potentially putting your organs at risk for the prolapse, right? So I think it's understanding that connection where it's like, this is going to happen. Your organs are going to shift down in your body. Like, there's going to be a shift of the things inside you that help you to survive. Your vital organs are going to shift down. Yeah.
No, sure, absolutely. And so, Courtenay, all of this is, of course, relevant and important unless you've had children. So in the postpartum phase, so once you've had children, it's perfectly normal to pee yourself during training. Is that correct?
No.
but that's
Not
what I hear.
normal.
I hear that so often. Oh yeah, but I've had children. That's why. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's because your pelvic floor's been under so much load. Like, you've carried a growing fetus, like baby, for 9 months along with your organs. That's downward pressure. Your pelvic floor is going to start stretching underneath your organs and become really, really weak. And then, you've got, if you're having a natural birth, you're pushing a baby out of your muscle, possibly causing tearing if that's pretty common, and then being restitched back up. So your pelvic floor's affected there. Or if you're having a C-section, you've cut through your diaphragm, sorry, not your diaphragm, your transverse abdominis. This one, they don't cut your diaphragm, sorry, through here, which is part of that core unit. So then you can't regulate the pressure in there, and it will still affect your pelvic floor. So most women also say, oh, I had a C-section, my pelvic floor's fine. You've still carried a baby. You've now got a compromised core unit because it's not functioning in its proper motor control anymore. So, it's really common because it's been under load and strain, but it still doesn't make it okay or normal. It's just something that you really need to pay attention to after. Some women don't have any issues at all, which is like lucky them. Woo. But other women have problems after that.
I think it's also noting that, understanding that if a woman has a six-pack, that's not indicative to meaning they have a strong pelvic floor or that their core is strong. There's plenty of women that I know have a six-pack that are just shredded, but their pelvic floor is weak. That doesn't, just because their six-pack is ripped doesn't mean their pelvic floor is strong. And that's a thing. People are like, oh, I have a strong core, I have a six-pack. That's inaccurate.
Yes, I agree with that, because often, more than not, people who can really have are super shredded often recruit their core wrong because they're fully abdominally bracing rather than focusing on their really deep support muscles or stabilizing muscles as well. So not often when I test through like transabdominal ultrasound and show women how they're actually contracting their pelvic floor, it's always wrong with the ones who are more fit sometimes, like more than often not than the ones who don't do anything, because they're not overtraining all of these external core muscles rather than their deeper postural blade muscles.
But I thought we touched, I guess, on incontinence in the postpartum phase. But what other aspects of training would you be looking at for somebody who's in postpartum, like somebody returning to exercise? Is it perhaps aerobic training that you get them to return to first, or is it strength-based training? I know it'd be very individual for each person, but what would be some of the key sort of, right, let's progress you in this fashion as you return back to training? Will, perhaps I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think it's limiting the amount of high impact movements. Like if they're going to do box jumps, they should be doing step ups and step downs. They should be doing extra work for their pelvic floor at a minimum to get that going first. That should be the first thing, is to get their core strong and their pelvic floor strong and fixed before they start doing anything crazy. All the movements should be reintroduced, right? You should work on your strict static strength as far as, pressing horizontally, vertically, pulling horizontally, vertically, whether it be pull-ups or things like that. It should be all very, very strict based, more of like a bodybuilding type to get the muscles strong. And then you can introduce, if they're into something like F45 or CrossFit or Barry's Bootcamp, whatever it is, then you can introduce those more high intensity, as far as intensity meaning speed and load, right? Everything should be very, very controlled in the beginning. I always recommend, like my sister just had her second child about a year ago. So once she finished, and she's a nurse, so she understood her pelvic floor to get it good. From there, it was, all right, let's work on some tempo-based strict strength. Get that going and understand positional strength, and not just pressing back and forth, but understanding how things feel from start to finish.
Yeah, absolutely. And Courtney, if you could add to that some other considerations, or simply just re-emphasize what Will was talking about.
Yeah, I am a really big believer in trying to help women understand that their body is going to be capable of things that are very different to what they were pre-pregnancy or pre-baby. So I get a lot of women that want to return back to exactly what they were pre-pregnancy, but their body has shifted so much. So they're often learning body awareness again, balance, and their center of gravity is always different. They just don't ever feel the same. So reconnecting with all of that is my initial form of like where I would go first with returning to exercise. I'm very much like see people who are very goal variant in terms of what they're after for their training. So they might be wanting to return to running, or return to even just spin class or the gym or CrossFit or whatever it is that they might be. So I would definitely taper more towards their individual needs. But range of motion and posture are huge as well, because often they're in this slumped breastfeeding position, or they've got, they're not sleeping well anymore, or sometimes they'll be laying in the bed sleeping trying to stay awake whilst breastfeeding and have this terrible posture. So joint range of motion is often compromised. So getting, like Will said, getting full extension overhead is often a problem. And even working on their postural muscles, because their body has changed, is way more important. And then moving into functional movement, body weight first, and then loaded as obviously they're progressing.
That's awesome. Thank you, Courtney. And Will, I knew this would happen. These topics are topics that certainly the two of you could talk about all day for, and certainly I know Ed and I and the rest of us could listen all day. However, we have reached that time where we have to wrap it up. But what a great discussion. I know we've only scratched the surface really, but Courtney, if people want to get in touch with you as an exercise physiologist who's clearly passionate about this subject, how would they get in touch with you?
They can check out my social media. So my business is Her Exercise Physiology. That's on Instagram as well as Facebook. I have a website as well they can check out. So all my contact details are through there. But those are probably the best way to get in touch with me if anyone needs any help.
No, thank you. And I know we're planning a seminar to dive deeper into these subjects, and we'll have more details on that soon. Will, I mentioned at the beginning about the Wonder Woman program. If anyone's interested to take a look at that, I think you have a trial period available as well. Where would they go to find out details of that? Sure,
yeah. So our website is theprogrambywanderfit.com. And then if you just navigate to the programs page, there's this free 7-day trial for that. That program is included with all the rest of our programs. So you'll have access to, tomorrow, it'll be 4 programs as we launch our new dumbbell program tomorrow. And then, yeah, on Instagram, it's just WJ Hankey is me on Instagram, and the program by WonderFit.
Fantastic. Thank you. And For sure, we've discussed some really important topics that more people need to know about, and we plan to do exactly that. It's 2020, people. Let's move with the times and dispel these taboos. With that said, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to our broadcast partner, Cosmerex Coffee, and to our guests, of course, Courtenay and Will. A huge thank you for joining us tonight from Ed and myself. Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be brave, have some fun, and lead by example.
Well, there you have it. Thanks very much for listening. And if you've enjoyed this, please go ahead, hit the subscribe button down below and the little bell icon so you get notified every time we upload a new episode. And if you think that one of your training buddies would also enjoy this, go ahead and share it with them right now. With that said, thank you once again. And as always, be brave, have fun, and lead by example.